Just in case you're wondering, Professor Chris, are you going to a funeral? Why all black? No, not going to a funeral, but I'm in one. I was playing. Let's go. All right. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Ed with Professor Chris. Today is going to be a tough one. And in answer to your question as to why all black is because of the topic I will be discussing today. But before I get into that, as serious and as sad as this is going to be, I do still want to just make a quick point here with the podcast. We are doing very, very, very good with this podcast. And once again, thank you all for subscribing, but I need your help. On an average, we do have about 18, the last time I checked, getting close to 20 million students just in the US alone. My goal this month is for us to reach 10,000 subscribers, just 10,000. And then we'll see what happens after that. And I think we could do it. The last podcast, I had actually parents sharing it with their sons and daughters and their family. And I got a good review from parents just thanking me for that podcast. So with that, again, I do need your help. Please share the videos. Please do subscribe. Let's just aim for 10,000 and then we'll work on the next one later. I do also just want to thank a dear brother and a very good supporter, Mr. Chuntai. Chuntai Reggae Music. He's got a studio creative sessions for his ideas and thoughts on how to promote Let's Talk Ed. So I just want to say thanks to that. All right. So with that, as I mentioned, this is going to be a tough one, but also one that I know students are dealing with. And always thought about what would be the right time to do this. It's no coincidence, by the way. Happy Easter. Okay, and that's not the reason I'm in black, but also a very good remembrance. But again, happy Easter. For those of you that are on break, take some time off. I'm hoping you have a good Easter weekend. The reason this is going to be tough is because I will be talking about loss and how to cope with loss. I'm going to start with my own story. And I just really wanted to do it very quick also so then I don't get too emotional as I talk about this through the podcast. But yes, many, many years ago, I did lose my sister even before I got to high school. Unfortunately, I carried that with me to college when I was thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. And I think that's what made it even more challenging when I was in college. Sadly, it wasn't talked about, so I had to deal with it on my own. Lots of praying until I came to the realization that I need to let it go and actually started going through the grieving process. So it took me many, many, many years to do that. So yes, I do know a thing or two about loss while in college. As usual, here are the statistics. Students, it's been shown, studies, that students go through grieving process, go through loss. 37% to 44% of college students will experience a loss within the first 2 years of their academic career. 37 to 44%. At the same time, 60% of college students overall report having experienced a loss by the end of their academic career. So which means, going back to the last episode when we're talking about whether to date or not to date, if you remember, that percentage was almost about the same. 60% of college students who actually go through some kind of relationship while in college. And I talk about heartbreaks, and I did mention in that episode that I will be talking about loss today. 60% of students overall will report having experienced a loss by the end of their academic career. So we know this is going to happen, and it happens. So how do we deal with it? Okay. The topic for today is going to be navigating loss, coping strategies for college students. Coping with loss is very, very significant. It could be one of the biggest challenges you're going to experience while in college. And by all means, I pray and hope every time that students don't go through this. Usually it's a loss of a loved one, a relationship, sometimes a dream, or even a sense of identity. But today's focus is going to be specifically on losing loved ones or people that are very, very close to us. Why is it important? As I already mentioned, this is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges you're going to have in college if you happen to find yourself in that situation, because there is not a one-fit-all solution to losing someone while you're in college. However, there is a process to kind of get you through it. And everybody is different and every situation is different, which is why it makes this very, very complicated. So of course, every time now we talk about challenges the students are going to face, we cannot ignore mental health. As big as this is, when it comes to the mental health, it can be also that challenging. All right. I do have to kind of make a viewer's discretion here because of some of the stories that I'll be sharing. I'm going to do my best as I get ready to share a story that might be a little bit graphic to kind of give you the heads up. I'm going to pause to see if you want to just take a break, turn down the sound if it helps, and then just move forward. But whatever you do, I'm going to provide strategies. So I will let you know, again, when I'm about to talk about something that may seem a little bit extreme, okay? But I do have to share it. All right. So let's understand loss in college. Let's get the concept of what that is. Usually there are different types, right? The death of a family member, the death of a friend, loss of a relationship, loss of a friendship. And this could be people that you're very close with. So it might not just be a family member, but maybe somebody you're dating. It does happen, right? Not too often. Again, that could be very, very heartbreaking, but it does happen. On those levels, okay, so this is kind of what I want to focus on, and also the ones that I've encountered with my students in terms of loss. We have to talk about some of the statistics again. So in that scenario that I just talked about in terms of the loss, as I mentioned, 18.4 million students that are currently enrolled in the American colleges, 4.5 million college students will be grieving or are grieving. Okay. 4.5 million. 8.6% of college students' academic performances are being affected by death of a family member or a close friend. And this was just reported in the last year. 8.6%. And it should not come as a surprise. Because again, I've talked about different situations or different challenges that students face and how it affects their academics. So definitely loss can have a very big impact on academics, which we will be discussing as well. All right. As I mentioned, I'm at that point. Viewers and listeners' discretion advised. I'm going to pause here for a minute. Again, if you want to turn sound, maybe sound off, might be a little bit helpful. Okay. The first story I'm about to share was actually a situation that I've never really encountered. And the reason is, when my student came to me and said, Professor Chris, I'm going to need some time off. It actually started with, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to finish this class. I registered for 4 classes. I think I'm only going to be taking 2. Not really disclosing immediately why that was the case. Eventually, as the student gained my trust, she told me she was on the verge of losing her brother. Unfortunately, there was nothing to do to help the brother. So at that point, it was just counting down the days. And this is what I meant by, I have never encountered anything like that, where a student is actually preparing for the passing of a close member of the family, her brother. It took months, apparently, as they were preparing for this to happen. The day it happened, she told me about it. She told me when the service was going to be. And at the very minimum, what I could do was to go to the funeral. And I was there because I knew what that was going to do to her. It meant that I did care, and yes, I did, and also to let her know that I was there to support her. Never seen anything like that. Even preparing for that incident to happen, she still had to go through a grieving process after it happened. And that also took over a semester. The second one, again, viewer's discretion, because this is going to be very graphic, was when the friend of my student came to me and said, Professor Chris, he's not going to be coming to class anymore, and maybe for a long time. And I said, what happened? Is he okay? He ended up telling me that the friend's mom was killed by the stepdad with a baseball bat, murdered. Never in my life have I ever heard anything like that. How does a student get through something like that? Once again, I found myself at a funeral home trying to support my student when this happened. One of my students couldn't even come to school for a couple of weeks until his friend, who actually happens to be one of my TA, told me that he had lost his brother through a motorcycle accident. 3 kids left behind that my student now had to help support. Last but not the least, Again, I'm sorry, but viewer's discretion as I talk about this last one. When my student knocked on my door, it was close to finals week, and she said, Professor Chris, in tears at that point, I'm just here to let you know that I might not be able to make the finals. Is there any way I could make it up later? I was even surprised that she was at my office asking permission to miss an exams when she just lost her dad. And not just losing her dad, but the dad happened to be working at a construction site, fell several feet down and broke his neck. Okay, so why do I share these stories? It's just because usually we don't think this happens. We don't think this situation probably happens in college. We don't think students are going through this here. And again, this is just 4 examples. We're talking about 4.5 million students that are probably grieving and going through this. My big question, however, is how do these students cope with such tragic losses? I wish I could tell you that they all do great. Unfortunately, out of the 4 stories that I just told you about, there is one student that it took him a really, really, really long time to get through it. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the challenges. Usually when it happens, students go through different type of emotions. Can get very angry. Can feel guilt. I think actually that was my situation, was guilt. Yes, I think mine was guilt. Because for a very long time, I thought it was all my fault. But I have to come to a healing point. Students go through avoidance. Some are in shock. Some could be in denial, loneliness. And then yes, I think this goes hand in hand with feeling guilty. You start questioning, what if? What if? You could get into very deep sadness. And of course, sometimes anxiety. Now you put all this together and you find a student who probably is away from home and is trying to deal with all these emotions. Obviously, it is going to affect your academics. So there's academic pressure. And not only that, we all know how social our campus could be. And now you have to figure out how to transition to what you were before. Sadly, the way students tend to cope with grief is absolutely not the best way. Because what is the number one approach? What is the first thing usually students do? One is they don't want to tell anyone and they don't want anybody knowing, and that includes instructors and people who can actually support them. Most go through this process of being in denial or trying to figure out if somehow it's going to magically go away, and it doesn't. And unfortunately, that is the approach that students use. Okay, now let's talk about some of the strategies and the resources. I'm going to go through this here very, very slowly because most students do not know this, and the students that I've helped, that I've dealt with, I think this was one of the biggest relief areas because they had no idea where to even start. I will also probably use this opportunity to share with instructors and professors who will find themselves in this situation. And if they don't, maybe to share and let their students know that if they're going through this situation here, they are there to help. I think one of the biggest relief to most of my students that were going through this process was finding out that there are policies in place for grieving. That means, yes, there are opportunities to help students. All you have to do is make sure you're discussing and you're talking to your instructors or your professors about a loss. Because yes, there are policies. It could be an incomplete grade that you could get, so you could be out for the semester. You could withdraw from the class. And there's different ways of dealing with this. And yes, our college system, I know usually we talk about the challenges that we go through in the college system. College is not just meant to just drive people off the wall, right? Which is why there are policies and there are different things to make sure that students are going through different challenges and different ways to kind of help them. Grieving is one of the biggest challenges you're going to face. So yes, of course, there are different ways to kind of help you, which is why I encourage every student, your very first step is make sure you are discussing this with your instructor or your advisor. Next, hopefully you're able to discuss this with someone and they're able to give you the time to take off to work on yourself. Working on yourself, by the way, doesn't mean you're going to be in isolation. Working on yourself, that means you're practicing self-care, you may be exercising, and you're doing things to get your mind back right. You got to find a creative outlet. My advice to students, again, usually that are going through this the same situation, one is, of course, sharing my own experience with them to let them know that I do understand exactly where they're coming from and there is going to be help. But the last thing any student want to do is to disengage. You never want to disengage, but engage. Okay? All right. Next, I want to talk a little bit about building resilience and moving forward. I'm going to start that with the same 4 stories that I shared with you in terms of my students that were going through losses. I'm going to do this very quickly. As I mentioned with myself, I got to a point where I realized how to forgive myself and to say to myself, it wasn't my fault, and that is how my grieving process started. And thank God I was able to get through it. My student who lost a dad went through a process, and I admire her so much just because of the way she went through the process, and I share this with students all the time. She was absolutely engaged. She was working with her professors constantly to make sure that assignments, she knew exactly how much workload she could handle. Very, very important. I mean, she went through the process so perfectly. And that's why I use her example all the time. She came back, fortunately for her, as I mentioned, it was during the finals. So she came back, took her finals, did good. But she had a break. She was able to work with her mom. She was able to work with different advisors. She was talking to her instructors and was able to kind of get through college and graduated. And I'm so proud of her as to how she was able to go through the process. My student who lost a brother, it was the same way. She was able to go through a process, some resilience, and moved forward, and also was able to graduate. Unfortunately, the incident with my student and the mom and the stepdad was not that easy. Unfortunately, and sadly, it took years. But the good news is I still followed up with that student, not directly through him, I must add, because it was so difficult talking about the situation, but through his friend, just finding out how he was doing, whether he was back in school, and the good news I got was that he did it and he did graduate. Okay. So when it comes to resilience and moving forward, I kind of went over kind of a process, but again, if you listen very carefully, I think the process in there is really engaging so people can know where you are. It's not a matter of people getting into your business, but this is a situation where you're not broadcasting or talking to everybody, but you're trusting a few people that can help you through the process. So hopefully, you can integrate that loss, right, into your normal life. There are different ways to do that. You could start writing a journal, you get into personal narrative, also finding out who is actually going through that process to share with them how you're dealing with it. There's different ways to do that. Okay. But you have to start that process. Grieving is a journey, and there's different ways to do that. But again, one thing you have to do is to make sure that you're engaging and you're talking to different people so you can move forward with that. Okay. I didn't want this episode to be a long episode. I just wanted to get straight to the point because of how challenging, again, it is for myself, but also for students that are going through this process here. So very quickly, I just came up with 3 resources that students could use. This was actually very new to me, and again, back in the day, I didn't think there was any of these resources around or available to kind of help students. But there are quite a few. I just picked 3. One is Actively Moving Forward. This is, I guess, an organization that helps students to process grief and offers general information on grief, virtual support, grieving coaching, and other resources for students. So again, that is Actively Moving Forward. And you could Google it, share it with your friends that might be going through any type of loss while in college. And then the second one is Active Minds. And I will put all this here on the podcast so you can see it and so you can research it. Active Mind is an organization that encourages advocacy for mental health conditions on college campuses and offers resources on depression, anxiety, self-care, and finding help. Okay, so that's Active Minds. Last but not the least, maybe this could be a whole different area. And again, a loss is a loss. But sometimes, I give you different scenarios. A student that was preparing for a loss that just happened, loss that is out of somebody getting killed or murdered, right? Which we never anticipate. And the last resource I'm going to provide here has to do with loss through suicide. Didn't even think about that. But as we're looking at different types of losses, yes, you could lose someone so close to you, and that loss could be through suicide. Reason I think this is very challenging is because of the questioning part, where you find yourself questioning, could I have done something to help this person? Okay, that resource is Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors. Alliance of Hope. All right, again, I'll post all this. So very quickly, the first one is Actively Moving Forward, Active Minds, and Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors. I will post all this here so you can see it on the podcast, and then you could find a way to reach out if that helps. In closing, here are my top 5. Number 1, I cannot stress this enough. You have to report that situation to your instructor. If it's not every instructor that you're taking a class with, just one instructor will be fine. Or your advisor. That person who may be really kind enough to say, I will take care of this. I will reach out to all your other instructors to let them know what is happening. Don't worry about your classes. We will work on that when you come back. Number 1, please report it immediately to your instructors. As I mentioned, there are different policies in place and the different ways to kind of help you with grief if you do lose a loved one. Number 2, take some time off your academics. Yes. This is why you talk to your instructors to give you the time. On that time off, it is also not a time to try to get back into your books immediately. That is a time for you to really see where you are, to take care of yourself first. And your academics is not going to be a support, even though usually it gets your mind off things, and that's fine. But not so much, I need to get this work done because I'm going to fail, or I need to get this work done so it doesn't affect my grade. Grieving is a journey. So when you're grieving, you're not trying to do things that you're pressured into. So you're doing anything, again, take your mind off the academics. Don't worry, it will work itself out. And when you're ready to come back, it will be there. Number 3, isolation is not a remedy. Don't disengage. Engage. Isolation just breeds loneliness and doesn't do anything but puts you deep, deep, deep into the situation that you're already in. Okay? So again, my number 3 is that isolation is never a remedy. Don't disengage, but rather engage. Number 4, understand that a loss does not end your life. I'm going to repeat that. Understand that a loss does not end your life. I have always said this. If the person you love dearly, the person you love so dearly, you lose that person, do you for a second think that person is hoping or wishing that you go through grief your whole time? If anything, they are hoping that you could get over this loss to get back your life, because it wasn't intentional, it wasn't planned that, oh, I'm going to go through this here to put you in that situation. So if it helps, you need to understand that a loss does not end your life. And I've always said, you got to make those that you've lost proud. And the only way you're going to do that is the resilience and making sure you have a way of moving forward. And my last, but not the least, probably one that got me through my situation, was praying. Again, in my case, it was guilt. And I had to pray. I wasn't sure what I was trying to pray for forgiveness for, but I did it. Until eventually, I kind of had a revelation. I wasn't sure how much resilience I had, but I was able to move forward. So, those are my top 5. Once again, I do understand this was a very, very difficult topic to discuss, but I'm hoping that I've addressed it enough to the point that you know how to deal with it. Even if it's not for you or for your friend, this is probably one of those podcasts. Again, subscribing aside, this is one that I wish and I hope it will get to as many students as could get to, just to watch it and hopefully to get some pointers out of that. With that, I encourage you all to go through your semester. Please, I hope nobody goes through loss while in college. Well, loss, period. But we know that's inevitable. So hopefully it doesn't happen in college because of the academic pressure that it puts on you. But again, I've given you some good pointers, and hopefully your instructors may also watch this, and they already know. I don't need to tell any instructor how to kind of help a student that is grieving or is dealing with loss. Okay, so hopefully you find those resources. And until next time, I will see you all on Let's Talk Ed, sorry. Get a little emotional here. Let's Talk Ed with Professor Chris. I think I do have a special guest next week, so stay tuned.